Imagine standing high in the Andes Mountains, surrounded by swirling mist and towering jagged peaks that seem to touch the sky. The air is thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and ancient earth. As you navigate narrow, winding paths carved into the mountainside, suddenly you come upon a city unlike any other, Machu Picchu. This incredible place isn't just a forgotten ruin, lost to time. It is the remarkable brainchild of one of history's greatest leaders, Pachacuti, the legendary Inca emperor who transformed a small, struggling kingdom into a vast, thriving empire. Pachacuti wasn't just a conqueror wielding weapons, he was a visionary with a mind far ahead of his time. When he ascended to the throne, the Inca were little more than one of many fragmented tribes, fighting for survival in a harsh, unforgiving mountain terrain. Yet Pachacuti dreamed bigger than anyone before him. He united these tribes under a single banner, forging a society that wasn't just powerful but culturally rich. A civilization where art, science, spirituality, and engineering flourished side by side. Machu Picchu was his crowning achievement, a city perched high above the clouds, crafted as both a royal estate and a sacred spiritual sanctuary. What truly makes Machu Picchu so fascinating is how flawlessly it blends with the surrounding natural environment. The Incas carved terraces into the steep mountain slopes, transforming rocky cliffs into fertile farmland that could support thousands of people. Ingeniously, they designed a water system that channeled pure mountain springs through stone aqueducts and fountains, ensuring life-giving irrigation throughout the city. The city's temples and structures weren't built randomly. They were carefully aligned with the movements of the sun and stars. This precise celestial connection shows how deeply the Incas understood astronomy and its role in agriculture and religious ceremonies. Even more astonishing is the craftsmanship of the stonework. Gigantic granite blocks were cut with such extraordinary precision that they fit together perfectly, like puzzle pieces, without any mortar holding them in place. This architectural mastery has baffled modern engineers and architects for centuries and has helped Machu Picchu survive countless earthquakes. But Pachacuti's story goes far beyond the stones of Machu Picchu. His reign marked the incredible rise of an empire that stretched across thousands of miles of rugged Andean landscapes, connecting diverse peoples through a shared language, Quechua, and a unified culture. The empire was a mosaic of cultures, united by roads and communication networks, tribute systems, and shared religious beliefs. Despite the brilliance of his leadership, Pachacuti's empire was not destined to last forever. After his death, internal rivalries erupted. Brothers fought brothers in brutal civil wars, fracturing the unity that Pachacuti had so carefully built. At this moment of vulnerability, the Spanish conquistadors arrived with their guns, horses, and diseases unknown to the indigenous peoples. The mighty empire that Pachacuti had forged quickly began to crumble. While the empire fell, Machu Picchu remained hidden from the eyes of the invaders, protected by its remote and nearly inaccessible location. Its stones whispered stories of a civilization that was far more advanced and spiritually profound than the conquerors understood. Today, Machu Picchu stands as a timeless symbol, not only of Inca ingenuity and architectural genius, but also of their deep connection to the natural world and the cosmos. So the next time you see those breathtaking photos of Machu Picchu, the terraces carved into the mountains, the sun rising over its temples, remember that it's far more than just a beautiful tourist destination. It is a story of vision, resilience, and the incredible power of human creativity. It's the story of Pachacuti, a ruler who dared to dream beyond the limits of his time, and of a people whose spirit continues to inspire the world, centuries after the empire fell. The sun rose like a golden god over the spine of the Andes, casting its firelight across jagged peaks and mist-filled valleys. Here, in the breathless heights of what would later be called Peru, the world was not silent, but filled with a hum that seemed woven into the stones. It was in these lands of icy breath and trembling earth that a people would rise, unlike any before them. They would craft stone cities on mountains where condors soared and draw empires with the thread of a language not written, but remembered. They were the Incas, and their story began long before Machu Picchu crowned the clouds. Before the empire, there was legend. In the early days, long before the great roadways and terraces, the Andean highlands were dotted with small tribes, farmers, warriors, and wanderers. They fought the land, tamed the cold, and revered the mountains as gods. One such god, Inti, the sun, was said to have sent his children to bring order to the chaos. From the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca, the god's son, Manco Capac, and daughter Mama Ocolo emerged, clad in gold, with a mission: civilize the world and establish a great city. With a golden staff, Manco Capac wandered north from the lake, searching for land, fertile and sacred enough to plunge the staff into the earth and have it swallowed whole. After many trials, he arrived at a valley cradled between jagged ridges, Cuzco. Here, the staff sank into the soil and vanished, and here he would build the first stone of what would one day become the heart of an empire. But this wasn't an empire yet. It was barely a village. Generations passed. The children of the sun, the Incas, survived in the shadows of stronger kingdoms, like the Chimu on the coast and the Wari to the north. They were a modest people then, farming the steep slopes and praying to their gods for balance in the turbulent land. Nature was never kind. Earthquakes split mountains, rivers flooded in the spring, and droughts left the crops like dust. But hardship made them sharp. From stone and soil, they learned to thrive where others failed. It wasn't until the time of a ruler named Sinchi Roca, many generations after Manco Capac, that the Incas began to truly reach beyond their narrow valley. Still, their power was modest. They were but one kingdom among many, until fate placed a boy upon the throne who would change it all. His name was Pachacuti. When Pachacuti was born, the Inca kingdom was in peril. His father, Viracocha Inca, ruled during a time of danger. To the south, a powerful and bloodthirsty tribe, called the Chanca, prepared for war. Their numbers dwarfed the Incas' modest forces. Their warlords swore to burn Cuzco to the ground and scatter its stones to the winds. Viracocha, convinced of defeat, prepared to flee. He gathered his nobles and sons and planned escape into the mountains, abandoning the city. But young Pachacuti refused. Still a prince, not yet crowned, he rose with a fury neither his father nor brothers expected. He stood before the trembling warriors, before the elders and generals, and declared he would defend the city with or without them. Whether it was divine right or the spark of destiny, Pachacuti began to rally the people. His voice carried like thunder through the valleys. Farmers became soldiers. Youths learned to wield the sling and spear. Women forged arms from melted bronze. Temples turned into command posts. Then, something strange happened. The stones of the city were said to have whispered to Pachacuti. The spirits of the ancestors, called huacas, were said to have appeared to him in visions. On the eve of battle, the prince walked alone through the sacred plazas, offering prayers and blood to the gods. The next morning, when the Chanca came, they met a wall of fire. The battle raged for days. At first, the Incas were driven back, their small army buckling under the enemy's strength. But Pachacuti stood fast. He rode into battle, not with a crown, but with a jaguar skin cloak and a club of obsidian teeth. When the Chanca chief was struck down, the tide turned. The Inca forces surged, screaming the names of their gods. The Chanca retreated, then fled. When the smoke cleared, Cuzco still stood. The people wept and called Pachacuti not just a hero, but a god reborn. It was then that the prince became Sapa Inca, the sole ruler, the divine emperor. Pachacuti's reign would become one of the most transformational into human history. He saw beyond survival. Where his ancestors had only looked to the next harvest, he envisioned eternity. He declared the time of myth was over. The Inca were to be not just a tribe, but a civilization, an empire. He began with stone. Cuzco was remade. The city's layout was reshaped in the form of a puma, its sacred animal. Its temples were plated in sheets of gold that shimmered like captured sunlight. The Coricancha, Temple of the Sun, became the spiritual heart of the world. Its walls were adorned with golden corn stalks and idols of silver. Pachacuti declared the old gods honored, but he demanded new glory. He rebuilt what nature had once broken. He planned like a god and ordered like a storm. But his vision didn't stop at Cuzco. The Inca Empire was born not in a single city, but in movement. From Cuzco, Pachacuti sent messengers, chasqui, swift runners trained from childhood, to every corner of the realm. With no written script, they carried messages in knots of thread, quipu, and in the strength of their legs. They traveled the emerging road system called the Chapacnan, which stitched together the vast spine of the Andes, from present-day Ecuador to Chile, and from the jungles of the Amazon to the deserts of the coast. Through diplomacy and war, Pachacuti expanded. Kingdom after kingdom fell or surrendered, impressed by the Incas' engineering, their promises of protection, or terrified by their gods of thunder and sun. The Wari, the Chimu, the Nazca, all ancient peoples, were absorbed. Their temples became Inca temples. Their languages faded, replaced by Quechua. Their kings bowed or were erased. But Pachacuti did something no other conqueror of his time had done. He built not just armies, but a unifying identity. He offered conquered peoples a place in his new world. In exchange for tribute, he gave them roads, aqueducts, food storage, and protection. He moved entire populations, resettling them to maintain peace. He ordered terraces carved into impossible cliffs to grow maize and potatoes. He turned mountaintops into observatories of the stars and temples of stone that aligned with the solstices. And he built a city in the sky, Machu Picchu. Hidden among the clouds, on a narrow ridge between two peaks, Machu Picchu was not like other cities. It was not the capital, nor a center of trade. It was something else, sacred, secret. Its walls were cut with such precision that no mortar was needed. Its stones, some weighing over 50 tons, were dragged and lifted without iron tools or wheels. How they were moved remains a mystery. But its purpose, at least in part, was clear. It was a sanctuary, a royal retreat, and perhaps a gateway between the worlds of gods and men. Only those closest to the Sapa Inca were allowed to tread its pathways. The temples aligned with the stars. The terraces clung to the mountains like the green feathers of a bird. The stone windows opened not just to the valley, but to eternity. It was a place of quiet breath and divine presence, a jewel hidden in the clouds. As Pachacuti aged, he prepared for the next world. Like the rulers before him, he believed that death was only a transition. His body was to be preserved, mummified, and kept in the care of priests who would feed it offerings, and prayers. The Incas believed the dead still lived, in ceremonies, in council, in dreams. Before he died, Pachacuti appointed his son, Tupac Inca Yupanqui, as co-ruler. Together, they expanded the empire farther than even Pachacuti dreamed. Under their leadership, the Inca realm became Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. It was the largest empire ever seen in the Americas. A land of 1,000 climates, 1,000 tongues, unified by stone roads and the will of the sun. But even as the empire stretched to the horizon, even as the cities gleamed and the storehouses overflowed with food, shadows stirred beyond the seas, a darkness unlike any the Andes had ever known. And so begins the next part of the tale. The streets of Cuzco once rang with the laughter of children and the music of festivals. Priests in golden headdresses once sang hymns to the sun, and noble women swept stone corridors in palaces clad with woven finery. But in the days following Atahualpa's execution, a suffocating silence descended upon the navel of the world. The once great city, shaped in the form of a puma, stood still as if stunned by its own sudden powerlessness. When word of Atahualpa's death reached Cuzco, shock rippled like lightning through every district. Atahualpa had not been beloved by all. His war against Huascar had torn families and villages in two. But he had been the victor, the Sapa Inca, and for many, his death at the hands of foreigners was unthinkable. Huascar, who had been paraded as a prisoner during the Civil War, had been executed by Atahualpa's generals not long before the Spanish struck. With both brothers dead, the empire had no clear leader, no guiding voice, no unifying flame. The once seamless order of Tawantinsuyu began to unravel. The Spanish, armed with steel and greed, moved swiftly. Francisco Pizarro led his men from Cajamarca to Cuzco, using the knowledge forced out of their Inca captives. They were astonished at what they found. Cuzco was not merely a city, it was an empire in miniature. Golden walls adorned the temples. Fine ceramics, feather cloaks, and bronze tools filled the storerooms. The Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, gleamed with so much gold that its walls reflected the morning light like polished mirrors. And then they took it all. The plundering was not done with subtlety. The conquistadors stripped the temples bare. Gold idols were melted into bars. Artifacts hundreds of years old, sacred to the Inca and their ancestors, were reduced to coin. Soldiers pried gemstones from the eyes of statues. Even the great golden disk of Inti, the sun god, vanished, stolen, lost, or hidden away. But the Spanish needed more than gold. They needed control. To pacify the chaos, Pizarro appointed a puppet emperor, a young noble named Manco Inca Yupanqui, brother of Atahualpa and Huascar. He was Inca by blood, and the Spanish hoped to use him as a tool to legitimize their conquest. At first, Manco complied. He sat upon the throne, wore the fringe of authority, and played the part. But within his heart, a fire still burned, an ember of rebellion, small but stubborn. The people, too, had not yet surrendered in spirit. Throughout the empire, rumors spread of resistance. In remote valleys, Inca warriors organized under forgotten banners. High in the Andes, priests continued their rituals in secret, and in the sacred city of Machu Picchu, wordlessly, it waited. It was abandoned by court officials and elite priests, but not desecrated. The Spanish never found it, never even knew to look. Its hidden location and treacherous terrain kept it veiled. It survived because it vanished. Manco Inca endured humiliation after humiliation at the hands of the Spanish. He saw his advisors imprisoned, his soldiers mocked, and his people beaten. One day, in a calculated fury, he slipped away from the Spanish court and vanished into the mountains. His escape was no mere retreat. It was the birth of a counter-empire. He rallied those still loyal to the old ways. Farmers, warriors, priests, and messengers answered his call. He sent word to distant provinces. The Inca were not finished. The time of rebellion had come. In 1536, he struck. Manco Inca launched a massive siege of Cuzco, catching the Spanish off guard. Tens of thousands of warriors descended from the surrounding hills, armed with slings, clubs, spears, and fire. The Spanish, outnumbered and surrounded, scrambled to fortify themselves within the heart of the city. For days, they were trapped, cut off from water and food. The high citadel of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking Cuzco like a lion's crown, was taken by the rebels. From there, boulders were hurled into the city with terrifying force. Smoke rose, temples burned, the dead piled in the streets. Victory seemed within reach. But the Spanish were nothing if not vicious. They fought with desperation, their horses slashing through crowds like mythical beasts. Their cannons tore holes through enemy ranks. They launched raids under cover of night, disrupting the Inca supply lines. The siege wore on, and the Inca forces began to falter. Hunger gnawed at them. Disease spread through their camps, and the Spanish received reinforcements from other conquistadors eager for plunder. Sacsayhuaman was retaken in a brutal assault. Rebel leaders were captured and tortured. The siege collapsed. Cuzco remained in Spanish hands. Manco Inca fled once again, this time into the heart of the Vilcabamba region, deep in the cloud forest beyond the reach of Spanish horses. There, in the mists and hidden valleys, he built a new Inca capital, a final stronghold, a final dream. From Vilcabamba, the neo-Inca state was born. Though smaller, less organized, and constantly under threat, this remnant of the empire endured for decades. Manco Inca established a new court, maintained religious rites, and trained warriors. He sent scouts throughout the Andes to stir rebellion. Some resisted, some surrendered, and some betrayed. But Manco did not stop. Even after his assassination at the hands of treacherous Spaniards he had once sheltered, his sons continued the fight. Back in Cuzco, the Spanish colonial government grew. Churches replaced temples. European buildings rose upon Inca foundations. The old gods were forbidden, their worship punishable by death. Priests came with Bibles and crosses, preaching of salvation, while standing on ruins of shrines to Inti and Pachamama. But the memory of the Inca refused to die. Every stone wall whispered stories. Every terrace carried the memory of 1,000 harvests. And in the minds of the people, the empire still lived, in songs, in stories, in the very air of the Andes. Farmers still performed ancient rites before planting. Weavers still hid symbols in their patterns. Elders told tales of cities hidden in the clouds, of a golden age not yet lost. Machu Picchu remained untouched. It was too remote, too sacred, too silent. Its stairways filled with moss. Its temples were claimed by vines. Llamas grazed where once priests walked barefoot in prayer. The wind passed through its windows like a ghost remembering old chants. It was forgotten by the world, but not by time. The centuries that followed saw wave after wave of change. The Spanish crown claimed the Andes. Silver from the mines of Potosi funded the empires of Europe. Disease, famine, and colonial oppression decimated the native populations. Entire cultures were erased or fused with European customs. The Quechua language survived, but was reshaped. Catholic saints wore the names of old gods. Ancient paths became colonial roads. And yet, deep in the jungle, Vilcabamba endured until 1572. It was there that the last Sapa Inca Tupac Amaru, not to be confused with the later revolutionary, was captured and brought to Cuzco. He was paraded through the streets like a trophy and then executed in the plaza where his ancestors had once ruled. With his death, the last political remnant of the Inca Empire was extinguished. But the story wasn't over. Machu Picchu, sleeping in the clouds, awaited rediscovery. Centuries later, long after Spain had lost its grip on the Americas, long after revolutions and republics, in 1911, an American historian named Hiram Bingham would stumble upon the sacred city. Led by local Quechua-speaking farmers and guided by the overgrown whispers of ancient paths, he climbed into the mist. There, he saw it. Terraces upon terraces, walls still standing, even after 400 years, temples precisely carved, altars aligned to stars, homes, ceremonial baths, towers, the bones of a city built to defy time. He called it a lost city, but the truth is, it was never lost, only hidden, guarded by the spirits of the mountains, protected by the land itself. The Inca, whose empire had vanished into ash, had left behind a monument not of conquest, but of soul. And so Machu Picchu emerged again into the light, not as a ruin, but as a testament, a memory, in stone. The empire had fallen, but its echoes still rose with the sun. Time passed slowly in the Andes. After the death of Tupac Amaru and the fall of Vilcabamba, the Spanish believed they had silenced the Inca. They had burned idols, outlawed rituals, and built churches on sacred ground. In their eyes, the divine order had shifted. Gold no longer served the sun, but the Virgin. The native tongue could still be spoken, but not sung to the gods. Yet even as the empire's body was buried under stones and smoke, its soul endured in the breath of the mountains. From the shadows, the people remembered. In the valleys and altiplanos, in the terraced farms carved into sheer cliffs, Inca blood still ran through the hands that tilled the earth. Quechua, once the language of administration, worship and poetry, survived on the tongues of shepherds and grandmothers. They spoke it softly, like a prayer, teaching their children that before the cross, there was the sun, and before the Spaniard, there was this Sapa Inca. The empire had died, but the world it shaped had not. Villagers continued to make offerings to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, hiding their rituals beneath the veil of Catholic saints. On feast days, they danced in costumes that blended colonial and indigenous motifs. Angels with condor wings, demons with jaguar masks. They built churches of stone blocks taken from Inca walls, the Spanish plaster crumbling long before the ancient mortarless joints gave way. Even their steps, their songs, their silences, everything was stitched with the memory of Tawantinsuyu. In Cuzco, the Coricancha became the church of Santo Domingo, but underneath its altar still pulsed the stones that once held the golden image of Inti. Pilgrims came from the mountains, pretending to honor the Virgin, but whispering the names of the old gods in secret. It was not rebellion, it was survival. But not all were content to remember quietly. In 1780, over 2 centuries after the Spanish conquest, the Andes trembled again, not with the voice of gods, but with the roar of rebellion. A man named Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui, claiming direct descent from the last Sapa Inca, adopted the name Tupac Amaru II in honor of the martyred king. With charisma, intelligence, and a deep sense of ancestral justice, he united thousands of indigenous people, mestizos, and even some Creoles under a single banner. His cause? To overthrow the Spanish regime and restore justice to the native people. His dream? To resurrect the spirit of the Inca. Tupac Amaru II launched a rebellion that exploded across the Andes like a lightning storm. His army took town after town, spreading fear among colonial administrators. Though not a revival of the empire in the traditional sense, his movement stirred something deep. In villages hidden among the clouds, old men and women whispered, "The Inca has returned." But the rebellion was crushed with brutal efficiency. Tupac Amaru II was betrayed, captured, and executed in 1781. His death was slow, savage, and meant to send a message. His limbs were tied to 4 horses and torn apart in the plaza of Cuzco. His wife and children were forced to watch. His body was dismembered and sent to the corners of the land. But the message the Spanish hoped to send, that resistance was futile, only deepened the myth. To the people, Tupac Amaru II had become more than a man. He was a prophecy, a symbol. His rebellion had cracked the silence and reminded the Andes that the sun once ruled the skies. His name would echo centuries later in movements of liberation across the continent, and Machu Picchu still waited. Unaware of colonial maps, overlooked by greedy conquistadors, the city in the sky remained untouched. Locals knew of it, of course. They called it Old Peak, and their ancestors still whispered stories about the sacred place where the Sapa Inca had walked, but they did not speak too loudly. The mountains did not like too much noise. Hidden by overgrowth, protected by sheer cliffs and twisting paths, Machu Picchu became a secret kept by the land itself. Then, in the early 20th century, the world changed. Railways carved into the mountains, academics and explorers crossed oceans, hungry for lost cities and forgotten empires. One of them was a man named Hiram Bingham, an American historian and adventurer who arrived in Peru in 1911 with vague accounts of Inca ruins tucked somewhere above the Urubamba River. He was not the first foreigner to hear of the ruins, nor even the first to visit them. But he was the first to see what they truly were: the crown of an empire lost to time. Led by a local farmer and a boy named Pablito, Bingham climbed through thick jungle, along ancient stone paths covered in moss and mist. And there it was, Machu Picchu. It wasn't grand in size, but it was grand in spirit. The stones were still fitted perfectly, as if breathing together. The terraces cascaded down the mountain like green feathers. Temples opened toward the sun, their windows still catching light in sacred alignment. There were ceremonial baths, royal houses, temples to the sun and the moon, and silence. So much silence. Bingham called it the lost city of the Incas. The world believed him, though it had never truly been lost, only hidden. Still, his discovery sparked global fascination. He returned with teams, equipment, and controversially took many artifacts from the site to the United States. His actions would later be challenged, and Peru would demand the return of its treasures. But in that moment, something ancient had been touched again. Suddenly, the empire lived once more, not in conquest or rebellion, but in wonder. Machu Picchu became a symbol, not of death, but of survival. It reminded the world that the Inca had not been a myth, that they had built not only roads and cities, but a civilization capable of harmonizing with the harshest landscape on Earth. A society that had created abundance without iron or wheels. A culture that saw sacredness in mountains, water, and stars. Tourists began to arrive. Scholars studied the architecture, the astronomy, the spiritual design of Machu Picchu. Debates raged over its true purpose. Was it a royal retreat, a ceremonial site, a university of priestly learning, or something even more profound? The truth, perhaps, was all of those things. What was undeniable was this: it endured. When empires fell and languages changed, when kings were executed and cities burned, Machu Picchu waited in the clouds, untouched. Like a breath held for centuries, it exhaled itself into modern memory. In the villages surrounding the mountains, old stories stirred. The people who lived in the shadows of the Andes felt pride, not colonial pride, not foreign nationalism, but something older, ancestral. Machu Picchu stood as proof that they came from greatness, that their ancestors could touch the heavens with stone and thought, that no matter how many crosses were built, the sun still rose through the temple windows just as it had 500 years before. In time, Peru embraced Machu Picchu as its heart. It was declared a World Heritage Site. It became a pilgrimage not only for tourists, but for those who carried Inca blood in their veins. On solstices, young Quechua dancers wore traditional clothes and offered coca leaves to the mountains. The ancient roads were walked again, not for war, but for memory. The Inca Empire had fallen, but its soul had never left the Andes. It remained in the songs of the wind, in the hush of dawn, in the patterns of woven cloth. It remained in the whisper of the stones, those same stones, still breathing together on the ridge of the mountain, waiting for the next generation to ask what they still had to say. The next chapter would not be written by conquistadors or scholars, but by the descendants of the people who had built a city in the sky. Machu Picchu, at last, was not silent, it was singing. Long before the Spanish set foot on Andean soil, before the empire fractured into civil war and gold was melted into coins, the Inca had bound their world together not with conquest alone, but with connection. Roads, not just dirt paths, but stone-paved arteries, stretched from Cuzco like sunbeams reaching across the mountains, deserts, and jungles. They were called the Capacnan, the Royal Road, and they were the nervous system of a civilization that saw motion as divine. This chapter of the empire's story had no battle cries, no betrayal, only the sound of bare feet, the whisper of runners, and the rumble of llama caravans. The Inca were not inventors of the road. Long before their rise, older cultures like the Wari and Tiwanaku had carved rough trails into the landscape. But it was the Inca who wove them into an intricate web, unifying an empire of more than 10 million people across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. The Andes were not a place for the timid. One wrong step meant a plunge into a gorge 1,000 feet deep. Storms came not with warning, but with wrath. Rivers carved canyons as fierce as any army. Yet still, the Inca built. The Capacnan stretched over 25,000 miles, an engineering marvel that rivaled the Roman roads in both complexity and scale. Suspended bridges, woven from Ichu grass, spanned roaring rivers. Stone steps climbed cliffs so steep that travelers ascended not with feet, but with hands. In the high passes, rest stations, called tambos, offered food, shelter, and supplies to imperial messengers and dignitaries. Some tambos were simple huts, others were as grand as mini palaces, staffed by caretakers and guards, set aside for generals or nobles on sacred business. At the heart of this living road system was the chasqui, the messenger. These were not ordinary couriers. Chasquis were elite runners, trained from childhood to sprint up and down mountains with barely a gasp. They carried messages across the empire in record time using quipu, knotted cords that conveyed everything from census data to battle plans. They passed these cords between each other in relays, their stations placed strategically along the roads like beads on a string. It is said that a message could travel from Quito to Cuzco, over 1,000 miles, in less than a week, all without horses, wheels, or writing. It was through this lifeline that Pachacuti commanded his armies, that Manco Inca sent word of rebellion, that farmers received orders, and priests received omens. And yet this was not merely a logistical feat. The road was sacred. Each section was sanctified, aligned with celestial markers. Ceremonial waypoints known as huacas were placed along key stretches, stones, springs, or trees considered sacred. Travelers would pause to leave offerings, coca leaves, feathers, chicha, or even a whispered prayer. These acts were not superstition. They were the glue that held the empire's soul together. Even Machu Picchu, nestled in the cradle between the peaks of Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu, was connected to this road system. A royal Inca trail wound its way through cloud forest, across stone bridges and tunnels, climbing slowly to the sacred city. Pilgrims took days to arrive, their steps a ritual of ascent. Each bend brought them closer to the gods. It was more than a trail, it was a transformation. When the Spanish came, they saw the roads but misunderstood their meaning. They saw utility, not reverence. They marched their horses along some of them, but tore others apart to build their own towns. They renamed valleys and villages, burned tambos, and built their own forts on Inca foundations. Still, the roads survived. The empire had fallen, but the paths remained like veins under the skin of the Andes. In the centuries that followed, local communities continued to walk the Chapacnan. They herded llamas along its edges. They brought their dead along it, following ancient funeral processions to mountaintop cemeteries. Stories traveled these same roads, myths of gods and emperors, warnings of betrayal, tales of hidden cities and returning kings. Even as modernity approached, railroads, asphalt, airports, the stone roads held their purpose. And in the early 20th century, when Hiram Bingham sought the way to Machu Picchu, it was not a map or compass that guided him. It was a fragment of the ancient trail, remembered by villagers who still knew the turns by heart. It led him through the mist, over collapsed tambos, and across narrow ledges until he emerged into the city in the sky. Machu Picchu had waited beside the road all along. Today, that same trail is walked again. Thousands of visitors make the pilgrimage every year. They hike the Inca Trail not for conquest, but for connection. They walk for 4 days, passing through cloud forest, across ancient terraces, over stone steps worn by centuries of feet. At dawn, on the final day, they arrive at the Inti Punku, the Sun Gate. There they see Machu Picchu, bathed in golden light, just as the Inca once did. Many weep, not for the ruins, but for the realization that the past is not dead, that somewhere in the rhythm of the mountains, the Inca still breathe, in the bend of the road, in the gap between clouds, in the echo of a llama's cry. There is memory. Some say the roads of the Inca were made of stone, but they were also made of longing, of faith, of belief that no distance was too great when the empire was your body and the gods were your sky. These roads were not lost, they were waiting. And so long as they are walked, the Inca walk with them. The mountains remembered. Long after the banners of the Sapa Inca were torn down, long after the temples were looted and the gold melted away, the wind still passed through the valleys of the Andes, whispering the names of the old gods. Inti, the sun; Pachamama, the earth; Ilapa, the thunder. Their images had been buried, their prayers outlawed, but the people still murmured to them in the quiet hours, not in loud festivals, but in quiet offerings tucked beneath rocks, in whispered chants beneath the stars. In a small village perched on a green shelf above the sacred valley, there lived an old man with long black braids and eyes like polished obsidian. He was a priest, or had once been, back when temples stood open and unashamed. Now, he was a healer, a farmer, a speaker to spirits when no one else dared. They called him a Malta Puma, the wise puma, for he walked alone like the sacred feline of the empire, silent and strong. Amotapuma was one of the last who remembered. He had been a boy when the Spanish took Cuzco. He had watched from the mountain trails as they paraded the captured Atahualpa's brothers, their heads bowed, their pride broken. He had seen the Coricancha, once lined with gold, turned into a cold cathedral where the scent of burning incense replaced the warmth of sun worship. But he never forgot the real rites. His grandfather had taught him the true names of the stars, the meaning of each solstice, the reason the stones of Machu Picchu were aligned so perfectly. He had never seen the sanctuary in the clouds, but he knew where it was, and he knew it must be protected. By the time he was an old man, most of the empire was a ghost. The Spanish had erased much of the past, but not everything. There were still a few scattered families who remembered the chants. Some still kept pieces of the quipu in hidden boxes, even if they no longer knew how to read the knots. And some, like Amotapuma, still believed that the gods had not vanished, only grown silent. One day, word reached the village. Strangers were coming up the mountains. Foreigners, with strange tools and thick boots, speaking a language no one understood. They carried notebooks and cameras, asking questions about ruins and lost cities. They wanted to know about a place above the river, a place where stones had no mortar, where the grass grew on terraces too perfect for nature. The villagers were wary. They did not speak much, but one small boy, no more than 10, with curiosity burning in his chest, listened closely to the strangers. His name was Taki. He followed them from a distance, watched how they climbed and slipped and laughed. He heard one of them say the word Machu Picchu and knew instantly what they were searching for. He ran to Amotapuma. "They seek the city of the cloud," the boy whispered. "They have found the stone trail." Amotapuma said nothing for a long time. Then, very slowly, he stood. He told Taki to bring them. But not all the way, only to the edge. He knew the mountains would decide the rest. Taki led them for hours, through mossy corridors and past waterfalls. The trail was choked in places with vines, but the stone still held firm beneath their feet. At dusk, they reached the final ridge, and there, Amotapuma waited. The foreigners stopped when they saw him. There was something in his presence, a silence that demanded respect. "You seek the city?" he asked in Quechua. They could not understand him, but one of them, a younger man, recognized the tone. He nodded. Amotapuma turned, raised one hand, and pointed. The clouds parted. There, in the dying light of day, the silhouette of Machu Picchu emerged, terraces spilling like emerald waterfalls down the mountain's flanks, temples clinging to the rock like old dreams, windows catching the sun's last breath. The foreigners gasped. They fell to their knees, not in worship, but in awe. They did not know it, but in that moment, Amotapuma was judging them. Were they looters? Were they here to steal, like the others before them? Or were they listeners? He watched as they stepped forward carefully, reverently. One of them removed his hat. Another touched the stone with bare hands and closed his eyes. They moved as if they were inside a cathedral, not a ruin. He approved. That night, Amotapuma sat by the fire and told them stories. He didn't speak their language, but Taki translated what he could. He told of how the city was built, not with force, but with faith. He told of how the stones were carved to breathe with the mountain, how no iron was needed because the will of the people was stronger than metal. He told them Machu Picchu was not just a place. It was a memory made solid, a pact between people and the gods. And then he warned them. "Do not awaken what you cannot understand," he said. "This city was made for balance. If you dig too deep, it may break." They promised to respect it, And they kept that promise, mostly. Puma died shortly after that visit. Taki grew older, became a guide for the visitors who began arriving more and more each year. He taught them about Pachacuti, about the sun's journey across the sky, about the hidden temple in the forest they never noticed. He kept the fire alive. Back in the valley, Machu Picchu was declared a national treasure, then a world treasure. Its terraces were studied, mapped, and restored. Its temples were cleaned of moss. But even as the world claimed it, even as millions walked its sacred paths, something remained untouched. The air, the way it clings to your lungs and reminds you of how small you are. The silence at dawn, when the sun rises over the jagged peaks and spills golden light through windows carved by hands, now dust. The deep feeling that someone somewhere is still watching. In the Andes, they say that when a puma dies, its spirit guards the place of its last breath. Some say they still see a jaguar-shaped shadow slipping across the stones of Machu Picchu just before dusk, pausing on a terrace, gazing down the sacred valley. A priest, perhaps, or a memory, or both. The mist hung low over the sacred valley, like a shroud of memory, hiding truths too old for the tongue. The Urubamba River, once the royal bloodline of the empire, snaked silently between cliffs that remembered the thunder of Inca boots and the whispered prayers of travelers. It was here, where jungle met sky, that the soul of the empire still lingered, hidden in stone, in shadow, in silence. Machu Picchu was not a ghost city. It was a living whisper, and centuries before it would be rediscovered, before foreign names would attach themselves to the sacred stones, it had a heartbeat. That heartbeat was a man, one not born in war, nor crowned by blood, but remembered by time. His name was Pachacuti Yupanqui, and he was more than a Sapa Inca. He was the architect of eternity. Long before Machu Picchu rose from the mountain ridge, the empire of the Inca was small, confined to the Cuzco Valley, surrounded by rival tribes and suspicion. The kingdom of Cuzco had endured for generations, but it was not yet mighty. It was a city of promise, not power. Then came a time of reckoning. The Chanca, a fierce tribe from the western highlands, descended upon Cuzco with fire in their eyes and obsidian clubs in their hands. 10,000 strong, they came not to negotiate, not to parley, but to destroy. The reigning Inca, Viracocha, saw the tide turning and fled with his heir, abandoning the city and its fate. But not everyone ran. His younger son, Kusi Yupanqui, stood in the plaza and stared into the heart of the storm. He was not yet crowned, he was not yet known, but something in him refused to break. He rallied the remaining warriors, gathered the farmers, and called upon the gods not with pleas, but with challenge. "Let the sky split," he shouted. "Let the rivers boil. If I fall, let the stones remember me." And the stones did. With a ferocity that defied all expectation, Kusi Yupanqui led a last stand. And when the Chanca came, fierce and numerous, the defenders of Cuzco turned into lions. The earth trembled with slingshot stones and war cries. It is said that the mummies of the ancestors, carried into battle in gold-wrapped litters, lent their spirits to the warriors. The Chanca were routed, broken, scattered. Cuzco stood. Kusi Yupanqui became Pachacuti, the world shaker. He had not just defended the empire, he had transformed it. Pachacuti was not a mere conqueror. He was a philosopher king, a divine craftsman, a visionary. His mind, sharp as obsidian and patient as granite, began to reshape the world around him. Under his rule, the Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, or the Four Parts United, was born. The city of Cuzco was redesigned entirely. Temples aligned with celestial paths, walls angled to survive earthquakes, streets designed for both defense and sacred procession. The city was built not just with mortar, but with meaning. But Pachacuti's greatest creation would not rise in Cuzco. It would be hidden, carved into a mountaintop where the gods whispered through wind and stone. He began building a city unlike any other, Machu Picchu. Why there, high above the Urubamba? Why in a place so remote, so unreachable? Because the place spoke. It hummed with sacred energy. It was aligned with both the stars and the water, with myth and stone. To Pachacuti, it was a womb of the gods, a place where the empire could speak not only to the heavens, but to eternity. He ordered his finest architects to the peak. He summoned stonemasons who had worked on the Coricancha, priests trained in solar observation, farmers skilled in terrace construction. Every piece of knowledge in the empire was brought here. No wheel, no iron, no draft animals, only hands, vision, will. They carved terraces into the mountain's bones. They shaped granite blocks so precisely they whispered against each other. They built temples aligned with solstices, with sunrises, with the crossing of the Pleiades. It was not just a city, it was an altar the size of a mountain. And he walked there, often alone. The Sapa Inca would leave Cuzco under veil and walk the sacred trail to Machu Picchu. There, he would meditate under the stars, consult priests, bathe in ceremonial fountains, listen to the silence between the hawk's cry and the river's song. He had believed Machu Picchu was a mirror of the sky, and he intended it to last longer than the empire itself. At the heart of Machu Picchu stood the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun. It was not a towering monument, but a carved stone rising from a platform, shaped and polished with unbearable care. It was said that this stone anchored the sun itself, ensuring it would not flee from the world. During solstices, it cast no shadow, perfectly aligned. Priests would gather there during key astronomical events. They would hum, burn coca leaves, offer chicha. They would read the future in the stars, in the wind, in the pattern of condor feathers falling from the sky. No writing was etched on the stone, no plaque, no decree, only silence. Because the people of the Andes did not need words carved in stone. They read the mountain, they read the sun, they read each other. Around the Intihuatana rose temples. The Temple of the Sun, built over a sacred cave that was said to house the bones of earth spirits. The room of the three windows, each opening aligned with a cardinal point and mythic meaning. The royal tomb, hidden in shadow, lined with niches and echoes. Yet Machu Picchu was not filled with thousands. It was not a city of masses, but of initiates, a ceremonial center, a royal retreat, perhaps even a school for the priesthood, where the future spiritual leaders of the empire learned to listen. What is certain is this: it was never finished. Its sudden abandonment, long before the Spanish arrived, remains a mystery. But some believe Pachacuti, nearing the end of his life, sensed the turning of the ages. The world does not change with thunder alone. Sometimes it changes in silence. Pachacuti's reign, though brilliant, sowed seeds he could not foresee. As he expanded the empire through brilliant diplomacy and brutal conquest, he created systems too dependent on central authority. The Mitmac system displaced communities. The Quipu bureaucrats stored data, but the knowledge was passed through memory, vulnerable to time, to death. And most of all, his children warred. His successor, Tupac Inca Yupanqui, carried the torch further, conquering the Chimu, building the northern reaches. But he, too, left behind feuding heirs, and so it went. Generation by generation, the empire expanded in size and fractured in soul. By the time the Spanish arrived, the Inca had become too vast to hold. Pachacuti died in Cuzco, wrapped in gold and placed in the ancestral chambers with his mummified fathers. His attendants claimed he still spoke through dreams, that his ghost walked the terraces of Machu Picchu when the fog grew thick. They buried him with sandals woven from wool dyed in condor blood. They placed a mirror on his chest to reflect the sky forever. Centuries later, in the early 1900s, when Hiram Bingham wandered into Machu Picchu with the guidance of Peruvian farmers and Quechua-speaking locals, he did not know he was stepping into a cathedral of forgotten breath. He thought he had found the final refuge of the last Sapa Inca. He was wrong. He had found the beginning. The sacred city had survived without intention, untouched by war, untouched by conquest. It had simply waited, hidden by cloud and distance. Its walls stood, its fountains still trickled. Llamas grazed between the stones. Trees wrapped roots around royal chambers. Bingham's discovery shook the academic world. Newspapers called it a lost city. Scholars descended with cameras and notebooks. Excavations began. Bones were catalogued, artifacts packed and shipped. And yet the soul of the place refused to be documented. No document could explain the feeling that came at sunrise. No photograph could explain why people wept in the room of the three windows. No measurement could calculate how the stones, cut without iron, still held perfect after earthquakes had shattered colonial churches. Machu Picchu was not a ruin. It was a breath. Today, when a Quechua child walks barefoot through the hills of Ollantaytambo, when a grandmother prepares coca tea for a weary traveler, when a guide sings the ancient lullabies while pointing to the stone terraces, all of it is the Inca still speaking, and Machu Picchu remains their altar. Tourists visit by the thousands. Some leave trinkets behind. Some kneel in the temples. Some do not understand, snapping photos and passing by. But every once in a while, someone stops. They feel the air. They hear the wind between the stones. They look down at the trail they hiked, the valley below, the sky above, and something ancient stirs. A thought not in words. A recognition. They do not know Pachacuti's name, but they feel his dream. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to build something that listens. Stone aligned with sun. Spirit aligned with earth. People aligned with each other. That was his empire. And though it fell in fire and gold, in civil war and conquest, it still breathes in the Andes, in every step on the Capac Nan, in every note of a panpipe echoing down the sacred valley, in every whisper of the mountain wind through Machu Picchu's empty windows. The emperor is gone, but his stones remain, and they are still listening. The sun was a golden disk melting behind the Andean peaks, casting long shadows across the terrace slopes of Machu Picchu. The air carried the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, while somewhere below, the Urubamba River murmured a secret song that had been sung for centuries. It was a place suspended between time and eternity, where stone met sky and history whispered through the cracks. Far from this sacred citadel, the great Inca Empire teetered on the edge of collapse. The throne in Cuzco was no longer a seat of unquestioned power, but a fragile crown held by two brothers whose ambitions could not be contained. The year was 1525, and the empire was already bruised by internal strife. Huayna Capac, the powerful ruler who had expanded the borders of Tawantinsuyu to their greatest extent, had died a decade earlier, leaving behind a legacy tangled in blood and uncertainty. The plague, brought by strangers from distant oceans, had swept through the highlands, claiming his life and that of his chosen heir. In the power vacuum, two sons, Huascar and Atahualpa, emerged. each claiming the right to rule. Huáscar took the throne in Cuzco, the ancient capital, nestled among sacred hills. Atahualpa held sway in the northern city of Quito, surrounded by loyal warriors and fertile lands. The empire was no longer united, but divided, a tapestry slowly unraveling at the edges. In the villages, along the rivers, and high plateaus, the common people whispered fearfully of the coming storm. They spoke of brother fighting brother, of blood spilled on sacred earth. They feared the gods might turn their backs on Tawantinsuyu, as if the very mountains themselves mourned the fracturing of their children. Yet even in these dark days, Machu Picchu stood aloof, cradled in clouds and mystery. It remained a place of refuge and reverence, a city where the sun still cast its golden blessing upon the stones, and the Intihuatana stone held the sun's path as it had for centuries. But the shadows gathering over the empire would reach even here. Huáscar, proud and fierce, ruled from Cuzco with the legacy of his ancestors heavy on his shoulders. He demanded loyalty and order, believing the empire should be governed with strict obedience to tradition. His court was filled with nobles who whispered plots and prayers alike, fearful of the unrest spreading like wildfire. Atahualpa, equally determined, gathered a formidable army in the north. His warriors were seasoned, their spirits forged in the dense jungles and rugged mountains of Ecuador. His advisors urged swift action, to march south and claim the heart of the empire before it could fall apart completely. The clash was inevitable. The civil war between Huáscar and Atahualpa was brutal and swift, tearing through the empire's veins like a plague worse than disease. Fields were left untended, cities abandoned, and alliances shattered. The war was not just a battle for power, it was a war for the soul of Tawantinsuyu. Meanwhile, far from the turmoil, word reached the valleys of a new threat. Men with pale skin and iron weapons had landed on the coast. They were conquistadors, driven by gold and glory, who marched inland with horses the people had never seen, and guns that roared like thunder. Their arrival would soon change everything. For now, the Inca were too consumed by their own strife to face this foreign menace. In Machu Picchu, the priests watched the skies and consulted the sacred quipus, reading the knot patterns that spoke of omens and fate. The llamas grazing on terraces were restless, their ears twitching at sounds no human could hear. The people who had once revered this city had long since left, but the guardians, descendants of the priests and farmers, still came to honor the old gods in secret. They knew that the empire was dying, but they also knew that the stones remembered. One evening, under a full moon, a group of elders gathered by the Intihuatana. Their voices rose in an ancient chant, calling upon Inti to protect the land, to bind the empire together, to keep the sun shining upon their people. Their voices echoed against the walls of Machu Picchu, a final prayer for a world slipping away. As the civil war raged, Atahualpa's forces advanced southward. Battles were fierce, and the land bore the scars of war. The great stone cities echoed with the cries of the wounded and the prayers of the dying. Yet, despite his victories, Atahualpa never took Machu Picchu. The mountain city remained untouched, as if protected by invisible hands. Some said it was because the city was too sacred to be sullied by bloodshed. Others whispered that the gods themselves raised a shield around it. Atahualpa, after claiming victory over his brother and consolidating power, prepared to face the foreign invaders he had heard rumors of. But fate had other plans. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro and his small band of conquistadors ambushed Atahualpa's camp near Cajamarca. The Inca emperor was captured in a swift, cunning trap. Despite his vast empire and loyal warriors, Atahualpa was powerless against the steel, horses, and weapons of the strangers. The fall of Atahualpa marked the beginning of the end for the Inca Empire. Back in the mountains, Machu Picchu was forgotten by the world. The city that had been built as a sanctuary, a symbol of unity and divine order, faded into myth and shadow. Its terraces crumbled, its temples swallowed by moss and forest. But the spirit of the Inca endured. Among the villagers who lived in the shadow of the great mountains, stories were passed down. Stories of Pachacuti's dream, of a city that listened to the sky, of gods who still walked unseen paths. These tales, whispered at firesides and in quiet prayers, kept the memory alive. The empire had fallen, but its heart still beat. In the stones, the stories, the sacred trails. Machu Picchu, the city in the clouds, remained a testament to the resilience of a people who shaped the earth and sky with their hands and their souls. And the Andes waited, patient and eternal, for the world to remember again. The morning light filtered softly through the dense canopy of the cloud forest, scattering beams of gold that danced like spirits on the moss-covered terraces of Machu Picchu. The city, once bursting with life, now lay silent, its sacred stones cloaked in centuries of mist and memory. Though the voices of its builders had long since faded, the mountain held their whispers, echoes of an empire forged in stone and sun, stories carved into every granite block. Far below, the Urubamba River sang its eternal song, weaving through the sacred valley like a silver thread, binding past and present. The surrounding peaks stood as solemn sentinels, shrouded in clouds that seemed to guard the city's secrets from the world. To those who knew, Machu Picchu was no mere ruin. It was a living presence, an altar where earth and sky converged. For centuries, the empire of the Inca had crumbled under the weight of civil war and conquest. The golden light of Pachacuti's vision had dimmed, and the vast Tawantinsuyu was shattered by brothers' blood and foreign steel. Spanish conquistadors had marched through the heart of the empire, their iron weapons and thunderous guns rewriting the fate of a people. But the sacred city in the clouds had slipped through history's grasp, hidden in the folds of time and mist. In villages nestled along the mountain slopes, the stories of the city of the clouds endured. The elders whispered them at twilight, their voices thick with reverence and sorrow. Children listened wide-eyed as tales unfolded of a place where the sun kissed the earth, where gods had walked and kings had prayed. These stories were threads in an unbroken tapestry, a link to ancestors who shaped the land with hands and spirit. Among these descendants was Nayari, a young woman named Gift of the Sun, whose heart beat with the pride of her people and the ache of loss. Raised by her grandmother, the last keeper of sacred knowledge in their village, Nayari learned the old songs, the prayers for Pachamama, and the sacred dances that summoned rain and blessings. She dreamed often of Machu Picchu, its soaring terraces, the enigmatic windows of the Temple of the Sun, the Intihuatana stone that held the sun captive. One dawn, when the first light ignited the horizon in hues of rose and gold, Nayari set out alone. Her feet knew the paths her ancestors had walked, the secret trails hidden beneath vines and lichen. She crossed crystal streams that sang of life's persistence, climbed steep stairways carved in granite, each step a silent prayer. As the jungle thickened, the air grew cooler, the mist heavier, until suddenly she emerged into a clearing bathed in sunlight. Before her stretched the terraces of Machu Picchu, a breathtaking harmony of stone and nature. The city rose from the mountain's spine, each wall and stair perfectly aligned as if the mountain itself had grown them. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, orchids, and cedar. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant cry of a condor soaring high above. Nayari approached the Intihuatana stone, the hitching post of the sun, its polished surface gleaming in the morning light. She knelt and laid her palm on the cool granite, feeling the energy pulse faintly beneath her skin, as if the sun's warmth still lingered, tethered to the mountain. Around her, the ancient temples whispered, their walls etched with the memory of ceremonies, sacrifices, and songs that once summoned the dawn. As she sat there, the wind stirred, carrying voices from long ago, chants of priests in golden robes, laughter of children playing on terraces, the solemn footsteps of the Sapa Inca himself. Nayari closed her eyes and listened, her spirit reaching back through time, touching the souls who had built this city with faith and fire. She felt a surge of responsibility, a calling to protect these stones, to carry the memory of her people forward. Machu Picchu was not just a relic, it was a living heart, beating with the stories of survival, resistance, and reverence. It was a sanctuary where the empire's soul endured beyond conquest and ruin. Days turned into weeks as Nayari explored the city, uncovering hidden niches, small shrines overgrown by moss, and terraces where crops had once flourished. She found petroglyphs telling tales of creation, of the sun god Inti's journey, of the Earth Mother Pachamama's embrace. With each discovery, the past unfolded like a delicate flower, revealing the intricate relationship between people, nature, and the divine. In the evenings, Nayari gathered the villagers around fires to share what she had learned. Her stories sparked a rekindling of pride, inspiring songs and dances that echoed ancient rhythms. Together, they vowed to honor the mountain city, not just as tourists or historians, but as heirs to a living legacy. Yet beyond the mountains, the wider world was changing fast. Explorers, scholars, and treasure hunters arrived, drawn by rumors of a lost city high in the Andes. They brought cameras, maps, and questions, fascinated by the precision of the stonework and the mystery of its purpose. Archaeologists debated theories, some calling it a royal estate, others a ceremonial center, while some sensed there was more than met the eye, a sacred geometry, a cosmic alignment. Nayari watched as visitors tread softly on the terraces, awed by the sight, but often missing the deeper connection. She knew that Machu Picchu was not merely a marvel of engineering, it was a prayer, carved in stone, a bridge between the earth and the heavens, a reminder of a people who had once shaped the world with their hearts. The city's silence spoke louder than words, teaching patience, humility, and respect for the natural world. It challenged all who came to listen, to remember that history is more than conquest, that culture survives through memory and reverence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and painted the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Nayari returned to the Intihuatana. The stone cast long shadows, and she whispered an ancient prayer, asking the mountain to watch over her people and their stories. She understood that Machu Picchu was a testament, not just to the past, but to the enduring spirit of the Andes and the promise of renewal. The stones held the echoes of an empire's rise and fall, but they also carried the hope that one day the world would truly listen. The early morning mist clung stubbornly to the steep slopes of the Andes, veiling the landscape in a pale gray curtain that only the rising sun could burn away. In the far distance, beyond the scattered villages and terraced fields, The great city of Cuzco lay quiet beneath its blanket of dawn. Once the radiant heart of the Inca Empire, Cuzco was now a city marked by tension and uncertainty. The mighty empire that Pachacuti had forged, spanning vast deserts, dense jungles, and towering mountain peaks, was beginning to unravel. The vibrant roads that once carried runners speeding messages across the kingdom now bore the silent weight of broken alliances. The great bridges spanning gorges and rivers, built with unwavering precision, were crossed cautiously by people wary of what the future might bring. At the center of this unraveling stood two brothers, born of the same blood but divided by ambition, Huascar and Atahualpa. The death of their father, Huayna Capac, and the plague that followed had left the empire without a clear heir. While tradition favored Huascar as the eldest, Atahualpa had gathered the support of powerful northern factions. The empire was split, its unity shattered, as brothers prepared to face each other in battle. The air in Cuzco was thick with whispers. Noblemen and commoners alike spoke in hushed tones of war, betrayal, and the fall of the divine order. The temple priests prayed fervently to Inti, the sun god, hoping for guidance and mercy. The stones of the Coricancha, once gleaming with gold and sacred offerings, reflected a world shadowed by uncertainty. While battles raged in the distant north, the people in the valleys and mountains tried to hold on to their traditions. Festivals continued in some villages, honoring Pachamama with offerings of maize and coca leaves. But even these celebrations carried an edge of desperation, a longing for peace and unity that seemed increasingly out of reach. Meanwhile, Machu Picchu remained untouched by the chaos. Nestled high above the sacred valley, its terraces and temples stood in solemn silence, as if guarding the last flicker of hope for the empire. The city had become a refuge for priests, nobles, and those seeking to preserve the old ways away from the turmoil below. Among them was Tupac Amaru, a young priest who had devoted his life to serving Inti and preserving the sacred knowledge of the Incas. Tupac Amaru had grown up hearing stories of Pachacuti's vision, the empire united under the sun's gaze, and he dreamed of a time when the empire might be restored. As he moved through the stone corridors of Machu Picchu, he touched the walls that had witnessed centuries of prayers, battles, and ceremonies. The Intihuatana stone, polished smooth and perfectly aligned with the sun, held a particular fascination for him. It was said to anchor the sun's path, keeping balance between earth and sky, light and shadow. Tupac Amaru often stood before the stone at dawn, watching as it cast no shadow during the solstice, a sign that the gods still watched over their people. He believed that as long as the stone remained, so too did the spirit of the Inca. But beyond the sacred city, the empire's fractures deepened. The civil war escalated, draining resources and weakening the defenses of the empire. When news arrived that strange men with metal horses and thundersticks had landed on the coast, many dismissed them as minor threats, yet others feared the beginning of the end. Atahualpa, victorious in the civil war, was preparing to confront these foreigners, confident that his armies could crush the invaders as they had his brother. But fate intervened cruelly. In 1532, near the town of Cajamarca, Atahualpa was captured in a carefully laid trap by Francisco Pizarro and his small band of conquistadors. The emperor, surrounded by thousands of loyal warriors, was taken prisoner without a fight. The shock of this event rippled through the empire like a thunderclap. The once united empire now faced conquest from without and dissolution from within. The sacred lands of the Incas, their temples and cities, were soon overtaken by foreign powers who neither understood nor respected the ancient ways. Yet even as the empire crumbled, the spirit of the Incas endured, locked within the stones of Machu Picchu, carried by the descendants who whispered the old prayers and kept alive by the memory of a civilization that reached for the heavens. The story of Tawantinsuyu was far from over. It lived on in the mountains, in the wind, and in the hearts of those who remembered. The sun was beginning its slow ascent over the towering Andes, spilling light over the jagged peaks and deep valleys that cradled Machu Picchu. The ancient city, perched precariously on its ridge, seemed to glow in the morning mist, its terraces layered like the pages of a book written in stone. Though centuries had passed since the last Inca ruler walked these stones, the spirit of Tawantinsuyu remained alive here, echoing through the stones, the wind, and the hearts of those who remembered. Among those who sought to keep the Inca legacy alive was Tupac Amaru, a young priest of humble origins but great conviction. He had been raised in the shadow of empire and conquest, learning the sacred rites of the sun god Inti and the earth mother Pachamama from his elders. His hands bore the calluses of one who had labored on terraces, his eyes the wisdom of one who had read the quipus that held the empire's memory in knots of colored cords. Tupac Amaru had grown up hearing stories of the empire's golden age, of Pachacuti's vision and the unity that once bound the four corners of Tawantinsuyu. Yet those stories were now tinged with sorrow. The civil war between Huascar and Atahualpa had rent the empire asunder, and the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors had shattered it like fragile glass. The once mighty kingdom was fragmented, its people scattered, its culture threatened with erasure. But Tupac Amaru refused to believe that the Inca spirit could be broken. Beneath the surface of conquest and colonization, he knew the pulse of his people still beat strong. The mountains whispered their secrets to those who listened, and Machu Picchu stood as a sentinel, a sacred space where the past and future met. Every dawn, Tupac Amaru climbed the steep paths to Machu Picchu, drawn to the Intihuatana stone, the hitching post of the sun. Polished to a gleam by ancient hands, it was said to tether the sun itself, ensuring its steady passage across the sky. Standing before it, Tupac Amaru felt the weight of centuries pressing upon him, the prayers of priests long gone, the hopes of ancestors, the resilience of a people who refused to vanish. One morning, as the sun's first rays ignited the horizon, Tupac Amaru was joined by Killa, a young woman whose name meant moon. Killa was a descendant of a noble line, but she had fled the chaos of the lowlands after her family was scattered by Spanish raids. She carried within her a fierce determination to preserve the Inca way of life, to hold fast to the knowledge of their gods, and to kindle the flame of resistance. Together they explored the city's temples and terraces, speaking softly of rituals, of the balance between sun and earth, and of the sacred geometry that made Machu Picchu more than a city. It was a living altar. Killa was fascinated by the Room of the Three Windows, its openings perfectly aligned with the sunrise during solstices, a place where light and shadow danced in sacred harmony. The ancestors built this place not just for the gods, she said. They built it for us, for all who would remember, even in the darkest times. Tupac Amaru nodded. It is a promise. As long as these stones stand, so too does the empire's soul. But beyond the mountain's embrace, the world was changing rapidly. The Spanish conquistadors pressed deeper into the Andes, their thirst for gold and power carving a bloody path through villages and cities. Indigenous allies of the Spanish sought to exploit the empire's fractures, further complicating the struggle. The once united people now faced a new enemy, one with iron weapons, horses, and the terrifying thunder of guns. Yet resistance burned brightly in the hearts of many. Small bands of warriors took to the hills, engaging in guerrilla warfare against the invaders. The Incas' intimate knowledge of the terrain, their ability to move silently through forests and mountains, made them formidable opponents. Tupac Amaru and Killer worked tirelessly to support these efforts, bringing supplies and spiritual guidance to those fighting to defend their lands. At night, around flickering fires, the stories of the empire's glory were shared. Songs in Quechua rose into the dark sky, telling of Pachacuti's conquests, of the weaving of the Capacnan, the great Inca road system, and of Machu Picchu itself, the sacred city hidden from the world. These stories were more than history. They were lifelines, binding the people together in identity and hope. One evening, as the stars shimmered like diamonds over the peaks, Tupac Amaru led a secret ceremony in a cavern near Machu Picchu. The air was thick with the smoke of burning herbs and coca leaves, their scent mingling with the damp earth. The gathered priests and warriors chanted prayers to Inti and Pachamama, seeking protection and strength. Tupac Amaru raised his voice above the chorus. Though our empire has fallen to fire and steel, our spirit is unbroken. The sun will rise again for our people, and the earth will remember the steps of our ancestors. Killer stepped forward, her voice steady. We carry their blood, their wisdom, and their dreams. Machu Picchu stands as our beacon. We will not let the light fade. The ceremony lasted deep into the night, their voices weaving a tapestry of resilience and faith. Outside, the mountains stood silent, witnesses to the endurance of a people bound by more than territory or power, a people whose legacy was etched in stone and sky. As months passed, Tupac Amaru and Killer traveled between villages, sharing knowledge and rallying support. They taught the children the ancient songs, passed down the sacred dances, and preserved the language that held their culture's soul. Each step was a thread in the fabric of survival, each story a seed planted in fertile ground. But the conquistadors' grip tightened. The old ways were outlawed, temples were desecrated, and idols destroyed. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet rebellion flourished. The people found ways to hide their faith, to speak in symbols, to honor the gods in secret. Machu Picchu, though abandoned as a royal retreat, remained a sanctuary, its stones a silent refuge from the storm. The city watched over the valley, a testament to what had been and what might yet be. Tupac Amaru stood once more before the Intihuatana, feeling the sun's warmth on his face. He whispered a prayer, not just for the fallen empire, but for the future. Let this stone hold fast, he said, and with it, the spirit of our people. As the sun climbed higher, casting light on terraces and temples, the promise of renewal stirred in the air. The empire had fallen, but the heart of Tawantinsuyu beat on. In the stories, the stones, and the souls of those who remembered. The wind curled through the towering peaks of the Andes, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine, mingled with the distant chorus of condors gliding overhead. Far below, the sacred terraces of Machu Picchu lay wrapped in a morning mist, like a city lost between earth and sky. Its stones, weathered but steadfast, whispered stories of a once great empire, its triumphs, its sorrows, and the unyielding spirit of a people who refused to vanish. In a small village nestled along the fertile banks of the Urubamba River, Amaru stirred before dawn. Named after the legendary Inca leader who had fought bravely against the Spanish invaders, Amaru carried the weight of history in his heart. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his hands rough from years of tending the terraces carved by his ancestors, and his eyes reflected the depths of the mountains he called home. Amaru had grown up surrounded by stories, tales spun by his grandmother, a revered elder who was one of the last keepers of the old ways. She taught him how to read the quipus, those intricate knots of colored cords that held the memory of their people, how to honor Pachamama with careful offerings, and how to listen when the wind shifted, revealing the language of the mountains. But the world around Amaru was no longer the world his ancestors had known. The Spanish had come like a storm, sweeping across the valleys with fire and steel. They tore down temples, seized lands, and imposed strange gods and laws. Many of the old traditions were forbidden, and the language of the Incas was slowly being drowned out. Fear and despair had settled over the villages, but in the hearts of some, including Amaru, the flame of resistance still burned bright. One morning, a messenger arrived at Amaru's village, breathless and urgent. The Spanish forces were tightening their grip on Cuzco, the ancient capital, and there were whispers that they planned to destroy the sacred sites that still stood untouched. Families were being uprooted, forced to abandon the lands they had farmed for generations. The message was clear. The time to act was now. Determined to protect his people and the legacy of the Incas, Amaru resolved to make a pilgrimage to Machu Picchu, the hidden city that was said to hold the wisdom and power of the ancient empire. It was a journey few dared to take, for the path was steep and treacherous, but for Amaru, it was a calling. Before dawn, he gathered a small pack, a bundle of coca leaves, a quipu his grandmother had entrusted to him, and a carved wooden amulet symbolizing Inti, the sun god. With a silent prayer to Pachamama, he began the ascent. The trail wound sharply upward through dense forests where orchids bloomed in vibrant bursts and the air was thick with the songs of birds. The path was slick with dew and moss, and sometimes Amaru had to grasp roots and stones to steady himself. As he climbed higher, the trees thinned and the landscape opened to breathtaking vistas of valleys veiled in clouds. Along the way, he encountered others on similar journeys. Farmers, shamans, and elders, each drawn by the pull of the sacred city. They exchanged stories and blessings, their voices soft and reverent, weaving a tapestry of shared hope. After days of travel, Amaru finally reached the terraces of Machu Picchu. The city stretched before him, its stone walls and stairways perfectly integrated with the mountain's contours. The sun, breaking through the morning mist, illuminated the intricate carvings and polished surfaces of temples and fountains. The air hummed with an almost tangible energy, as if the very stones remembered the prayers and footsteps of those who had built this place. Amaru wandered through the plazas, touching the walls as if greeting old friends. He found the Temple of the Sun, where rays of light filtered through a circular window to illuminate an altar, a sacred geometry aligned with the solstice. Here, priests had once called down the sun, connecting earth to sky, in rituals that balanced the world. He knelt before the Intihuatana stone, its smooth surface cool beneath his fingers. Legend said this was the hitching post that tethered the sun to the heavens, ensuring its steady passage across the sky. To Amaru, it was more than a monument. It was a symbol of the enduring bond between his people and the cosmos. In the silence, he felt the presence of the ancestors, voices carried on the wind, footsteps echoing in the stones, prayers rising like smoke. He closed his eyes and whispered a vow to carry the spirit of Machu Picchu back to his people, to keep alive the memory and wisdom of the Incas in the face of darkness. For days, Amaru explored the city, learning its secrets and sacred alignments. He studied the water channels that channeled mountain springs to irrigate terraces, marveling at the ingenuity that sustained life in such a rugged place. He traced the steps of the Sapa Inca, imagining the ceremonies and celebrations that had filled these spaces with light and song. When it was time to leave, Amaru felt both sorrow and resolve. Machu Picchu was a beacon, its stones a testament to the greatness that once was and a promise of what could still be. He returned to his village, carrying with him not just memories, but knowledge and hope. Back home, Amaru shared the teachings of Machu Picchu. He taught the children the sacred songs and dances, spoke of the sun's journey and the cycles of the earth, and showed how the terraces could still nurture life if tended with respect. His stories ignited pride and courage in the hearts of his people. The resistance to conquest continued, fought not only with weapons, but with culture and memory. Secret ceremonies honored the old gods. The Quechua language whispered in hidden corners. Machu Picchu's spirit lived on, a sacred flame in the Andes. Years later, long after Amaru's time, explorers would rediscover Machu Picchu, marveling at its beauty and mystery. But for those who knew, it was never lost. It was a living soul, a bridge across time, a testament to the enduring strength of the Inca. The mountains held their secrets well, but the story of the Incas was far from over. It lived in every stone, every prayer, every breath of wind that swept through the Andes, reminding the world that even in the face of destruction, spirit and memory endure. The clouds clung tightly to the high peaks as Amaru made his way along the narrow ridges that led from his village to the heart of the sacred valley. The air was thin, but it carried with it the heavy scent of wet stone and earth, a reminder of the rains that nourished the ancient terraces below. In the distance, Machu Picchu rose like a dream, its walls etched in shadows and sunlight, a city of stone and spirit suspended between heaven and earth. Amaru had journeyed here many times, each visit deepening his connection to the past, but this time the weight of history pressed heavier on his shoulders. The empire that had once stretched from the northern deserts to the southern jungles was fractured, its people scattered and struggling to survive under the yoke of foreign rule. Yet, in the quiet corners of villages and the hidden groves of the mountains, the old ways persisted. The language of the Incas, their prayers, their songs, their rituals, were whispered like precious secrets. And at Machu Picchu, the stones stood silent but resolute, guarding the memory of an empire that refused to die. Amaru found solace in these stones, in their timeless presence. He walked the terraces where maize once grew, imagining the hands that had shaped each block, the ceremonies held beneath the watchful eyes of the sun and moon. The Intihuatana stone caught the fading light, its polished surface reflecting the sky, a symbol of balance, endurance, and hope. But the world beyond was changing faster than the mountains could hold. The conquistadors had brought not only weapons, but diseases that swept through villages like fire, leaving emptiness in their wake. Families were torn apart, traditions threatened with extinction, and yet, amidst the suffering, resistance blossomed in unexpected ways. Amaru traveled from village to village, carrying stories and songs, teaching the young to honor their ancestors and their land. He helped organize secret gatherings where elders shared knowledge and priests performed rituals in hidden groves. These acts of defiance were small but powerful, threads of resilience weaving a tapestry of survival. In one such gathering, beneath a canopy of stars, Amaru met a healer named Nusta, whose knowledge of plants and spirits was renowned. Together, they worked to preserve the ancient medicine and wisdom of their people, blending faith and science in a way that defied the conquerors' attempts to erase their culture. Nusta spoke softly one night as they prepared a remedy. "The mountains remember Amaru. The earth holds our stories. As long as we listen, we will not be lost. Her words settled in his heart, like seeds waiting to bloom. As seasons turned, Amaru's efforts grew. He led pilgrimages to Machu Picchu, guiding those seeking connection to their roots. He spoke of Pachacuti, the visionary emperor who had united the empire and built this city in the clouds. He told of the sun's journey and the sacred balance between earth and sky. Each story was a bridge, a way to reclaim identity in a world that sought to strip it away. But danger lurked in the shadows. Spanish authorities increased their surveillance, fearing the spark of rebellion. Many were captured or forced to flee. Amaru himself had to hide, relying on the mountains and the loyalty of villagers to stay free. One cold morning, word came that the Spanish were marching toward Machu Picchu, intent on ransacking the site and seizing its treasures. The community rallied, determined to protect their sacred city. Under the cover of dawn, Amaru and Nusta led a small band of villagers to reinforce the defenses, setting traps and warning the nearby mountain tribes. They moved silently, shadows among shadows, blending with the mist and stone. When the Spanish arrived, they found a ghost city, empty but watchful. The people had hidden the most precious artifacts and sacred objects, burying them deep within the earth and carrying the memories in their hearts. The invaders, frustrated by the lack of gold and treasures, left the city scarred but standing. Machu Picchu survived, not as a prize to be plundered, but as a fortress of spirit and memory. Years passed, and though the empire's political power was broken, its cultural legacy endured. Machu Picchu became a symbol, not just of loss, but of resilience, a place where the past whispered its truths to those willing to listen. Amaru grew old, his hair silvered by the mountain winds, his eyes bright with the fire of his ancestors. Before his final journey, he gathered the young and old in the village square, sharing one last story beneath the endless sky. He spoke of the sun and moon, of balance and renewal, of a people who, though scattered, remained unbroken. He urged them to carry the flame forward, to remember Machu Picchu not just as stones, but as the heart of their identity. As he faded into the mountains, his words lingered like the mist, soft, persistent, eternal. The dawn broke cold and clear over the Andean peaks, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. Machu Picchu, perched high like a crown upon the mountain, stood silent beneath the awakening light, its stones gleaming faintly as the sun touched each terrace and temple. Though centuries had passed since its builders walked these paths, the city still breathed, a living testament to the ingenuity and spirit of the Incas. In the small villages scattered across the sacred valley, the stories of Machu Picchu and the empire that had built it were alive in the hearts of the people. The Spanish conquest had left scars deep in the land and its people, but beneath the surface, the culture and traditions endured, carried in whispered songs and secret ceremonies. Among those who kept the flame alive was Ima Sumac, a woman whose name meant beautiful in the old tongue. She was a descendant of the nobles who once served in the courts of the Sapa Inca, but she lived simply among farmers and artisans, teaching children the language of their ancestors and the sacred dances that celebrated the sun and the earth. Ima Sumac often spoke of Machu Picchu as a place not lost to time, but hidden in spirit, a city waiting to be remembered, a beacon calling her people home. She believed that the stones held power beyond their physical form, that they were keys to a deeper understanding of harmony between humanity and nature. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the terraces, Ima Sumac gathered a group of villagers in the plaza. They sat in a circle, faces illuminated by the warm glow of a fire. listening as she told the story of Pachacuti, the visionary emperor who transformed a small kingdom into an empire that touched the sun. She spoke of the Chapaknan, the vast network of roads that connected distant lands, enabling not just trade and conquest, but the exchange of ideas and culture. She described the construction of Machu Picchu, a masterpiece of engineering and spiritual devotion designed to honor Inti and Pachamama and to serve as a sanctuary for the Inca elite. As her voice rose and fell like the mountains themselves, the listeners felt transported, carried back to a time when the sun ruled the sky and the earth sang beneath their feet. But Imasumak's stories were more than history. They were calls to action. She urged her people to remember who they were, to honor their ancestors by preserving their language, customs, and sacred knowledge. In a world that sought to erase their identity, she said, remembering was a form of resistance. The following days were filled with preparation for a secret pilgrimage to Machu Picchu. Under cover of darkness, villagers packed supplies and mapped routes through hidden trails known only to those born of the mountains. The journey was arduous, filled with steep climbs and treacherous passes, but their spirits were lifted by the purpose that bound them. As they approached the city, the rising sun bathed the terraces in a golden light, revealing the intricate stonework and the harmony of the city with the landscape. The pilgrims knelt in reverence, touching the ancient walls, feeling the pulse of history beneath their fingers. Imasumak led prayers at the Intihuatana stone, calling upon Inti to bless their journey and protect their people. She spoke of balance, the delicate dance between sun and earth, man and nature, past and future. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, the pilgrims held a ceremony in the Temple of the Three Windows. The windows framed the constellations with perfect precision, linking the heavens to the earth. They sang ancient hymns, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to awaken the stones themselves. Machu Picchu was no longer just a ruin, it was a living heart, beating with the resilience of a people determined to survive. In the months that followed, Imasumak and her community worked tirelessly to teach the younger generation the language, stories, and rituals of their ancestors. They crafted textiles, patterned with symbols that told tales of creation and balance, passed down the knowledge of medicinal plants, and tended the terraced fields with reverence. Their efforts were a quiet rebellion against forgetfulness, a way to keep the spirit of the Incas alive in a world forever changed. Yet, threats lingered. The colonial authorities sought to stamp out indigenous practices, fearing their power to unite and inspire. Secret gatherings became more dangerous, and some were forced to flee into the deeper mountains. But the mountains held them like a mother's embrace, offering shelter and strength. The legacy of the Incas lived on in the songs carried by the wind, in the earth beneath their feet, and in the hearts of those who refused to be forgotten. Machu Picchu, the city in the clouds, remained their sacred refuge, a symbol of endurance, a beacon of hope, and a testament to the timeless bond between humanity and the natural world. The first light of dawn stretched slowly across the Andean peaks, spilling golden hues over the sacred terraces of Machu Picchu. The ancient city, suspended like a jewel high above the valley, seemed to awaken from a timeless slumber, its stones catching the morning sun and reflecting centuries of stories etched into their very fabric. Each carved block, each polished wall, was a testament to a civilization whose brilliance had shaped the mountains and sky itself. Once, this city was the heart of the Inca Empire, a marvel of engineering, art, and spiritual devotion. The great Pachacuti, visionary ruler and architect of empire, had imagined Machu Picchu not just as a royal retreat, but as a place where earth and heaven met. where humans could touch the divine. Built with precision that defied time, the city's terraces fed thousands, its temples reached for the sun, and its plazas echoed with the songs and prayers of a proud people. But empires, even those touched by the gods, are fragile. The coming of the Spanish conquistadors shattered the fragile balance. The empire, already weakened by civil war between brothers Huascar and Atahualpa, was ill-prepared for the relentless advance of foreign steel and fire. Cities fell, temples burned, and an ancient way of life seemed destined to vanish beneath the tides of conquest and colonization. Yet while the empire's political power crumbled, its soul endured. Generations of descendants, farmers, priests, warriors, healers, carried forward the sacred knowledge, the language, and the rituals. Though Machu Picchu was abandoned, hidden away in the clouds and obscured by jungle, it remained a sacred refuge, a place of memory and resilience. Among those who kept the flame alive was Ilari, a young woman born in a village nestled within the embrace of the sacred valley. Her name, meaning dawn, was a promise, a symbol of renewal and hope. From a young age, Ilari had been taught the stories of her ancestors by elders who still remembered the old ways, despite the dangers of speaking them aloud. She learned the Quechua language, the sacred dances, and the rituals that honored Pachamama, the Earth Mother, and Inti, the Sun God. As she grew, Ilari felt the weight of her heritage deepen. The stories were not mere tales, but lifelines, threads connecting the present to a glorious past and a hopeful future. She became a storyteller, a keeper of tradition, chosen by her community to speak for those who could not. One evening, beneath a sky scattered with stars, Ilari gathered the villagers in the central plaza. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning sage and earth. The flickering flames of torches cast dancing shadows on faces lined with both hardship and hope. She began to speak, her voice clear and resonant. Our ancestors built an empire unlike any other, guided by the sun and grounded in the earth. Pachacuti united the tribes, weaving them into Tawantinsuyu. The four regions united as one. Machu Picchu was their masterpiece, a city not of conquest, but of harmony, a place where humans lived in balance with nature and the cosmos. She told of the vast road system, the Chapaknan, that stretched thousands of miles, connecting mountains, jungles, and deserts. She spoke of the terraces that prevented erosion, the aqueducts that channeled life-giving water, and the temples aligned with solstices and celestial events. But then the darkness came, Ilari continued, her voice heavy with sorrow. The strangers brought fire, sickness, and fear. They tore apart our homes and sought to erase our ways. The empire fell, but our spirit did not. Her words stirred the crowd, their faces illuminated by firelight and tears of remembrance. We carry their blood, their wisdom, and their dreams. Machu Picchu may be hidden to the eyes of the world, but it lives in our hearts. It is a beacon, reminding us who we are and what we must never forget. As the night deepened, the villagers sang ancient hymns in Quechua, their voices weaving a tapestry of memory and defiance. They danced beneath the stars, in patterns passed down through generations, movements that told stories of creation, sacrifice, and renewal. In the weeks that followed, Ilari led a secret pilgrimage to Machu Picchu, journeying along the old trails carved by the empire's ancestors. The path was steep and treacherous, but each step was a prayer. When they arrived, the pilgrims knelt among the stones, touching the walls and terraces, feeling the pulse of history beneath their fingers. At the Intihuatana stone, the sacred hitching post of the sun, Ilari raised her hands to the sky. May the sun always shine upon our people, she prayed. May the earth forever nourish us, and may the spirit of our ancestors guide us through the darkness. The city seemed to breathe with her words, the stones glowing faintly under the rising moon. Yet, even as these acts of remembrance unfolded, threats remained. Colonial authorities sought to suppress indigenous culture, fearing its power to unite and inspire rebellion. Many gatherings were forced into secrecy, and some communities were displaced or destroyed. But the mountains held fast. Communities retreated to hidden valleys and forests, preserving language and traditions in whispers and song. They passed down sacred knowledge in coded stories, in the rhythm of dances, in the patterns woven into textiles. Machu Picchu, silent and steadfast, stood as a guardian, a place where the past and present met, where hope was rekindled. The legacy of the Incas is not merely a tale of conquest and collapse. It is a story of resilience, of culture reborn from ashes, and of a people who refuse to be forgotten. The spirit of Tawantinsuyu lives on in the earth beneath the terraces, in the stars above the peaks, and in the hearts of all who remember. As dawn finally broke, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, Ilari looked to the mountains and whispered a vow. May the sun rise forever on our lands. May the earth cradle our children, and may the spirit of the Incas shine eternal, guiding us home. The wind carried her words across the valleys and ridges, a sacred promise etched in the eternal dance of sun and stone. Machu Picchu remained, a timeless city in the clouds, a symbol of endurance, and a beacon for all who seek the light of memory.